Subscribe now. EU debates.
Your reaction to last night?
Well, very pleased last evening that the decision was taken. It's a significant decision in terms of the banning of the importation of Russian oil into the European Union, and really accounting for a very significant volume of Russian oil, and that will hit Russia. And I think clearly, there were significant challenges for some member states which had to be taken into account, given their dependency. I think there was since the beginning of this war, the actions of Vladimir Putin has united Europe more than ever before. And I was always struck at the first round of sanctions at the unanimity and the quickness of that unanimity, and that's following through. Now we're at the sixth round of sanctions, which, as you go from round to round, it becomes more challenging, and oil and gas are particularly challenging given the dependency on Russian oil and gas of some member states. What is very clear, though, is that we are at a watershed moment in terms of the European Union's dependency on Russian oil and gas, because side by side with the sanctions package last evening, we began discussions on the energy package, the REpowerEU, which is looking really to a more sustained and fundamental break in that dependency on Russian gas and oil. And if you dovetail that with our climate change agenda, it is a watershed moment in terms of fossil fuels in general, which will make for fairly rocky territory over the next number of years in terms of pricing around fossil fuels. We cannot get away from that. But on the other hand, what's clear from the presentation from the President of the Commission is that there's a need to double down on renewables, and a lot of focus from the Commission now on the permitting systems within member states, including our own, in terms of renewable energy, and the need to get offshore wind projects in place much sooner than would have been the anticipated timeline for offshore wind energy projects. So that's something that in the round is a significant issue. But last evening was good to get unanimity again on this question, to get agreement, and people worked hard to do that.
You spoke about rocky times ahead, Taoiseach. Does this mean that we've seen made permanent now high prices for diesel and petrol at the pumps for the foreseeable future? And what does that mean in terms of knock-on inflation?
Well, I think what I mean, Rocky, might be the best choice of words, but yeah, one is looking at a different era now in terms of pricing around fossil fuels. The war has really exacerbated this and created huge pressure. And there's no doubt in my mind that part of Putin's strategy was to create an energy crisis and also then to create a food crisis. And that will be discussed now this morning. There's really concern. We're meeting with the President of the African Union. Micheál will speak to the meeting this morning. There's real concern if you combine the impact of the war with drought in the Horn of Africa. We are facing into very challenging times around food security and famine across the Middle East and Africa. And that is an issue that is of huge concern in many member states, and in terms of the situation in Africa and indeed the Middle East. Just back from Lebanon, that it's a big concern. There's a lot of discussion last evening around how we can get grain out of Ukraine, and different routes being suggested, but it's all very, very difficult, and a very significant humanitarian crisis still awaits us in respect to the food dimension, and the war has really made that much, much worse.
And what is your message to Irish consumers now that they have to get used to high prices and maybe do their best to use less?
Well, I think we're going to work very hard to create alternative forms of energy, obviously, in the renewable piece. We've done well in Ireland in terms of electricity on renewables, but we've got to move much faster now to the end of this decade. We will do everything we can to alleviate the pressures on consumers. But if you look at the REpower Power initiative and communication, it's very, very clear that if you reduce permanently Europe's dependence on Russian gas and oil, that has implications for the global market over time. Now, look, there will be a lot of experts analysing that. There'll be a lot of shifts in that over the next number of years. But it will be challenging. There's no point in saying anything other than that it will be challenging.
Can consumers look forward to any further help from the government before the budget, or is that something that they will have to wait?
It'll be at the budget, and I think also I'm very mindful of the fiscal reports, the Fiscal Council's report this morning. And as I have said, we have initiated exploratory discussions with social partners around what's collectively the best way as a country to respond to this unique and very challenging set of circumstances, which has created very difficult cost of living issues for people on the ground, and we acknowledge that. So I think we have to be really strategic in terms of how we respond to that, and that's why we've commenced these exploratory talks with unions around pay, but also around other measures in terms of services and how we can, around childcare, education, health and housing in particular, that we can arrive at an agreement that doesn't make the situation worse from an inflationary point of view.
Some record profits generated by electricity companies last year, and we've seen the British impose a windfall tax. The Taoiseach said the government would keep an eye on that. Does that now come into the equation in terms of the budget?
Our situation is somewhat different to the UK's, and we will assess that in the round and what makes sense overall in terms of a sustainable market for us in Ireland. We import a lot of fossil fuels. We're not exactly masters of our own destiny in that regard. I think the most important thing we can do as a country is to double down on renewables and really get moving on the timelines around offshore wind. That's the big game changer for Ireland over the next decade, no doubt about that, because that ultimately, by the mid-2030s, would enable Ireland to become an exporter as opposed to a chronic importer of fossil fuels at the moment.
Thank you very much
indeed.
indeed.
Thanks.